Armed imposters posing as HOA officers showed up at Officer James Mitchell's doorstep, threatening his family and trying to enforce fake authority. One carried a toy rifle, the other a real one. None of them realized they were targeting a real cop with nerves of steel and justice on his side. But James wasn't just ready. He had a plan that turned their intimidation into a full-blown takedown. And just wait until you hear how this story flips on its head and why justice didn't just knock. It kicked the door down. James Mitchell never really left the badge behind. Not in his mind, not in his bones, and definitely not when it came to protecting his family. At 42, he had seen more than most men could stomach. A decorated investigator from Texas, James had taken a leave from the force, not because he wanted peace, but because his wife Sarah needed it. She was recovering from a complicated operation, the kind that makes you appreciate every sunrise. So James packed their things, grabbed their son Ethan, and moved them all to what looked like a quiet HOA-managed suburb just outside of Austin. A place with trimmed lawns, smiling neighbors, and too many rules for comfort. But it was safe, or so he thought. Their house sat on a corner lot with a wide wraparound fence and a big wooden sign that read, "Veteran lives here," armed and short-tempered. It was half joke, half warning. Most of the neighbors chuckled when they walked by. Some even nodded in respect. At night, 12-year-old Ethan liked to ride his bike in lazy circles around the cul-de-sac, while James watched from the porch, sipping black coffee and counting breaths. It was calm for once, until it wasn't. That evening started like any other. A pink-orange sky painted the horizon, and the hum of sprinklers filled the silence. Then the click of a gate latch broke the rhythm. James looked up and froze. 3 men in black uniforms were standing just beyond the fence. No cruisers, no body cams, no name tags, just black caps, black shirts, black gloves. One wore a plastic badge that said HOA Police Division. Another had what looked like a sidearm at his waist. None of them introduced themselves. They just stared at James's door like it owed them something. "Step out here. We need to talk like adults," one of them barked out. James didn't move. His voice stayed level. "Talk about what?" The man stepped forward. "You're in violation of community code. That fence is too high, and that sign's a visual obstruction. We're here to correct that." Inside the house, Sarah leaned closer to the window, her fingers trembling against the glass. Ethan ran to the door and whispered, "Dad, those guys are weird. One of them has a gun, but he's holding it all wrong. Like he's never even used one." That was all James needed. His instincts, sharpened over 2 decades of service, screamed that something was off. These weren't real cops. They weren't even HOA reps. They were pretending, badly, but with enough nerve to show up armed and confident. Calmly, deliberately, James walked to the hallway cabinet, unlocked a hidden safe beneath the stairs, and pulled out a weapon that wasn't meant for show. His Colt Python 357 revolver, a relic from his time as a U.S. Marshal, heavy, polished, and already loaded. He holstered it, zipped up his jacket, and stepped outside. The air seemed to thicken the moment he opened the door. "Gentlemen," he said in a voice that sounded like concrete settling. "Which department sent you?" No one answered. They shifted their weight. One cleared his throat. Another looked down at his boots. "You're armed. You're claiming legal authority. That puts you in a dangerous position," James continued. "At best, you're impersonating. At worst, you're committing a federal offense." The one with the fake badge stepped forward. "You don't get to ask the question, sir. We've got the authority. You either comply or—" James unzipped his coat just enough to show the chrome glint of his holstered Colt. "Or what?" he asked softly. "Because this Colt's already cocked. Now tell me, who are you really?" The 3 men froze. One's face drained of color. Another took a slow step back. But before anyone could answer, headlights cut across the lawn. A white Toyota sedan crept around the corner, its windshield reflecting red from a cheap magnetic light on the roof. It stopped behind the other men. A 4th figure stepped out. He was wearing black like the others, but in his hands wasn't a real weapon. It was a plastic rifle from a toy store. bright orange tip and all. That's when it hit James like a steel punch in the chest. These weren't amateurs. They were frauds. Dangerous, sure, but not because of training or tactics. Because they were reckless, armed with just enough stupidity to try this on any family, any home. They had no clue whose house they'd picked tonight. The fourth officer stepped onto the curb like he belonged there, his stride confident, oblivious. He had no idea the toy rifle in his hand stripped away whatever illusion of authority they'd been trying to fake. It looked like something from a dollar store. Bright plastic with an orange tip so blatant it could be seen from space. And yet somehow none of them realized the clown show they were staging was rapidly turning into something dangerous. Because one of them, standing to the left, wasn't holding plastic. The Glock at his side was real. James could tell from the worn holster, the way it sat heavy and snug on the hip, and the careless way its owner rested his fingers too close to the grip. The supposed ringleader stepped forward again, trying to reassert control. His voice was louder now, less sure. "Sir, you are threatening armed representatives of the Homeowners Association. That's a crime. We can file charges." James didn't move. Not an inch. His tone was steady, his posture ironclad. "You're standing in my yard, armed, no badges, no identification, flashing fake authority at a police officer's family. That's not a neighborhood dispute. That's impersonation of law enforcement, a federal crime. And in case you were wondering, no, I'm not just some retired vet on a porch. I'm an active investigator with internal affairs. I know exactly what criminals look like when they're pretending to be something they're not." One of the men took a step back, the one with the real firearm. Another licked his lips nervously, eyes flicking toward the driveway. The third, the one with the toy gun, started to understand. Not just that they'd messed up, but that they had picked the absolute worst house on the block. From behind the door, Ethan's small voice cut through the tension. "Dad, Mom doesn't feel good." That changed everything. James's eyes shot to the front window. Sarah was there, gripping her stomach, pale, swaying. The recovery had been hard enough already. She didn't need this. Not fear, not adrenaline, not stress that could send her straight back to the hospital. That wasn't just a threat anymore. It was personal. His voice changed. Cold, measured, not angry, not emotional, professional. "This is your final warning. Lie down. Face down, hands out. Wait for the real officers to arrive, or I'll put you down myself." One of the fakes twitched, reaching toward his belt. That was the moment. The Colt python clicked into readiness, James's stance locked, his aim precise, his entire body calm in a way that only 20 years in law enforcement could teach you. "Don't," James said quietly. "That was your last free mistake. I'm done being polite." From the window, Sarah's voice rang out sharp and clear. "I recorded everything, every word. Your faces, your threats. It's all on camera, and it's going straight to the feds." For a second, the street fell into perfect silence. No one moved. Not even the wind dared interrupt. Then, panic. The fakes scattered. One tried to run and tripped over his own boots. The second dropped the toy rifle as if it had turned hot. The third, fumbling with his belt, fell sideways and slammed into the mailbox. It would have been almost comedic if it hadn't been so reckless. These weren't pranksters. These were reckless people playing dress-up with real weapons, and they almost pushed a trained officer into a deadly confrontation on his own porch. James didn't chase them. He didn't need to. He was already back inside, grabbing his phone from the hallway shelf. His fingers moved fast but steady, dialing a number that wasn't public. A direct line. "Dispatch, what's your code?" 701, he said calmly. "Attempted illegal detainment. Impersonation. Suspected unlicensed firearm. 3 suspects fleeing on foot. Copy that. Nearest unit en route. Response team on standby." James looked back at the window. Sarah had sunk to the couch, breathing hard but safe. Ethan hovered beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other still gripping the doorframe. Then James added, his voice low and final, "Send cuffs." I didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. 15 minutes later, The street outside James Mitchell's home looked like a crime scene pulled from a television show. Blue and red lights bathed the houses in a surreal glow, bouncing off windows, and street signs like alarm bells made visible. 2 patrol cars parked diagonally across the road, blocking access from both ends. Behind them, a black SWAT SUV idled, engine rumbling low. The quiet neighborhood had become a front line. Paramedics moved quickly. Sarah was escorted out the front door, pale and shaken. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse unstable. They gently helped her into the ambulance, shielding her from the strobe of police lights. James watched silently, his face unreadable. His son Ethan stood beside him, clutching his arm, eyes wide with worry. The Colt python remained holstered, but every muscle in James's body was coiled tight, like a spring waiting for the next snap. A man in a dark uniform approached, broad shoulders, gold bars on his collar. County Security Captain Thomas Ross. He extended a hand but didn't wait for a shake. "Officer Mitchell, we got your code. You say they were impersonators?" James didn't blink. More than that. They didn't just show up in fake badges. They brought a weapon, threatened my family. One of them pointed a gun directly at me. The captain glanced toward the house, then toward the yard where the fake officers had stood just minutes ago. His jaw tightened. "We had something similar a month ago. Other side of the county. Same story. Phony HOA enforcers, intimidation, fake fines, even forced entry. We never got any formal complaints. People are scared, especially the elderly." James's hands clenched at his sides. "Well, now they picked the wrong house. This isn't just intimidation. This is organized harassment. This is men with firearms pretending to be something they're not. Cornering civilians in their own front yards. My wife just came out of surgery. My 12-year-old son saw it all. This was their last patrol." Another officer jogged over from the patrol car, holding a tablet. "Sir, we pulled the footage from your home security cam, but there's something else." He turned the screen toward them, and James narrowed his eyes. "Recognize him?" The officer asked, pointing to one of the faces. It was the one with the real gun. James's face hardened as the footage played. A grainy video clip from the previous week. Same man, different house. This time dragging an elderly man from a porch recliner. The victim's arm twisted unnaturally as he hit the ground. A Marine Corps flag flapped nearby, half unfurled. "We didn't receive this," the officer added quietly. "No one turned it in." "Because he was too afraid," James muttered, his voice like gravel. "That man's probably a war vet, and he got manhandled in broad daylight while playing by the rules." The captain looked grim. "It's worse than we thought." James's voice cut through the air. "You don't understand. These men aren't just grifters. They're predators. They're targeting the defenseless, the quiet ones, the people they think won't fight back. Today they knocked on my door. Tomorrow they'll knock on a widow's, or a blind man's with a folded flag and a dog on the porch." The silence that followed was thick. Every officer present could feel the shift. This wasn't just a call anymore. This was personal. This was righteous. Captain Ross folded his arms. "What do you propose?" James looked up at the night sky. The breeze rolled past, tugging gently at the American flag mounted near his doorframe. The stars and stripes waved with quiet defiance. "I propose we remind them what real authority looks like," he said, "and what happens when you try to play cop on the porch of someone who actually is one." The morning sun cut hard through the blinds of the county operations center. Inside, James Mitchell stood still, arms crossed in front of a whiteboard crowded with photos, mugshot-style stills and printed screenshots from surveillance footage. 3 faces stared back at him under the flicker of overhead lights, all grainy, all hostile. One of them was already circled in red. "Jason Lansing," said one of the analysts beside him. "Former grocery store security. Fired 2 years ago for using excessive force on customers. Has a record, misdemeanor battery, public disturbance, resisting citation." James nodded once, keeping his jaw clenched. He recognized the face immediately. Lansing was the one with the real Glock. Another staffer stepped forward, flipping a page on the clipboard. "The second guy, this one," he pointed to the heavy-set man with buzzed hair and an arrogant smirk, is Darren Hammond. No law degree, claims to be legal counsel for multiple HOA groups. Turns out he's been sending fraudulent violation letters, over 100 of them. We traced at least $120,000 in fake fines collected from scared residents across the state. James's eyes darkened. He's a con man with a printer and a badge from the internet. The third suspect hadn't yet been identified. The youngest of the group, barely out of his 20s by the look of him, and possibly the most unpredictable. No name, no background. But he'd shown up wearing all black and carrying a toy rifle, which somehow made the whole operation feel even more unhinged. Desperate. Reckless. James turned to face the rest of the room. Several officers from county law enforcement were gathered near the back, arms folded, silent. The air was thick with tension. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. This was about a pattern, and victims too afraid to speak. All three of them follow a pattern, James said, tapping the board. They dress the same. They show up unannounced, always in groups, target homes with elderly or vulnerable residents. They speak with authority, issue threats, carry weapons. Real or fake, doesn't matter. The result is the same. Fear. They're not just frauds. They're organized. This is a coordinated intimidation ring. Captain Ross, now standing off to the side, exhaled slowly and nodded. We've secured warrants. Lansing and Hammond are top priority. We'll issue a statewide bulletin on the third guy. But James, you're not part of the takedown. James turned to him, no surprise in his eyes. Because I'm too close. Because it happened on your property. Because your wife was hospitalized. Because the badge on your hip can't be used with that much anger in your chest. James offered a small, knowing smile. I get it. I'm a consultant. The captain gave a firm nod. That's right. Consultant. Nothing more. But as the room shifted back to discussion and planning, James stepped away. He wasn't angry about being sidelined. He knew the law. He respected the line between justice and revenge. But what the others didn't know, what no one in that room had any reason to ask, was that he had already made his own quiet decision. Because home wasn't just where his wife lay recovering. It was where three men had dared to test him. And James Mitchell had never left a test unanswered. At exactly 11:41 p.m., the small hidden camera tucked into the porch light of James Mitchell's house blinked to life. A motion alert triggered silently, beaming a live feed to his tablet screen in the garage. A black SUV rolled slowly down the street, headlights off, tires humming quietly over the pavement. Seconds later, a familiar white Toyota pulled in behind it. James didn't need to guess who was inside. Lansing and Hammond had returned, just like he knew they would. What they didn't know was that this time he was waiting. James stood in the shadows of his garage, wearing a black sleeveless shirt, tactical vest snug over his chest, and a body cam clipped to the strap just below his collarbone. On his belt were handcuffs, a flashlight, and his badge. He wasn't armed with the Colt tonight. He didn't need it. The element of surprise was on his side, and he intended to use it. The cars idled for a moment before both men stepped out, looking around cautiously. Lansing adjusted his shirt while Hammond tapped at his phone. They started up the walkway casual, like they had every right to be there. No uniforms this time, no fake badges, just arrogance. James emerged from the shadows without a sound. You know what's funny, he said, voice calm, cutting through the night like a scalpel. I warned you. Both men jumped, startled. Hammond staggered back a step. Are you insane? We just came to talk. Settle things. James raised an eyebrow. With a weapon in your waistband and fake credentials in your glove box. Lansing's eyes darted to his side, then to James's vest. His right hand moved instinctively toward his pocket. Bad choice. In a single motion, James closed the distance and drove his elbow into Lansing's collarbone, sending the larger man reeling. He hit the pavement hard, groaning. Before he could recover, James had one knee on his back and both wrists cuffed behind him. Smooth, controlled, professional. Hammond turned and made a desperate run for it, but barely reached the curb before James's voice stopped him in his tracks. Don't. Hammond hesitated, then kept going. James moved fast. He caught up in seconds, tackled him from the side, and brought him down, gently but firmly, into the gravel. No excessive force, no struggle, just efficient control. "You're under arrest," James said as he cuffed the second man. "Impersonating law enforcement, threatening a police officer, trespassing, and that's just the start." Lights came on across the street. Blinds shifted. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches, drawn by the noise. A few gasps. Someone murmured, "It's them, those guys from the other night." Cell phones appeared. Videos started recording. Then the real patrol cars arrived. 2 squad units pulled in from opposite ends of the street, their headlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Officers stepped out, already briefed, already alert. They moved in quickly to take custody. James stood calm and steady, breathing slow, the body cam on his chest still recording. "They came back," he said simply to the lead officer. "Same two, same intention." The officers nodded. Lansing and Hammond were pulled to their feet, read their rights, and placed into separate cruisers. All of it happened in full view of the neighborhood. No shouting, no panic. Justice, measured, clean, undeniable. And as the cruisers rolled away, James finally exhaled. Not because it was over, but because it had only just begun. The courtroom was packed. The case had drawn attention from the press and the public. Fake HOA officers threatening families, impersonating law enforcement, and extorting the vulnerable. The prosecution presented a complete picture. Fake patrols, forged fines, intimidation tactics, and even blackmail. Real HOA reps sat in shock, realizing the criminals had nothing to do with them. James stood tall on the witness stand, calm and direct. When the judge asked why he hadn't fired when a weapon was pointed at him, James replied without hesitation, "Because I'm a police officer, not an executioner." The room went silent. "But now I see how fear becomes a weapon in the wrong hands," he added. "I don't play law enforcement. I live it." Victims spoke next. A Marine vet shoved off his porch, a mother forced to remove her flag. Then Sarah stepped forward, visibly weak, IV still taped to her arm. "They came to my house while I was recovering. They came for my son. If my husband hadn't been there," her voice broke. The jury didn't need more. The judge looked at the defendants, Lansing, Hammond, and spoke clearly. "Guilty, maximum sentence on all charges. Justice was served. Swift, public, final." 2 weeks after the trial, peace had finally returned to the Mitchell household. Not the kind of peace that comes from silence, but the kind that's earned. James sat on the front porch in a weathered wooden chair, his boots crossed at the ankles, a mug of coffee in one hand and Sarah's fingers gently resting in the other. She looked healthier now, stronger. The color had returned to her cheeks, and though the scars of fear still lingered in her eyes, they no longer owned her. In the front yard, Ethan kicked a soccer ball back and forth, laughing every time it bounced off the fence. The same fence that once sparked a confrontation was now a symbol. Strong, standing, untouched. As neighbors walked their dogs or watered their lawns, they paused to wave, some with nods of respect, others with quiet gratitude. Everything had changed. People who once avoided confrontation now approached him with genuine questions. "Mr. Mitchell, do you think I should get a camera too? Is it legal to put up a warning sign? What kind of motion sensors do you use?" What started as fear turned into awareness, then into action. Within days, the neighborhood launched a private community watch chat, organized, respectful, and vigilant. And though it was unofficial, everyone knew who was running the show. James didn't ask for the role. He simply earned it. The HOA, shaken by the damage to its reputation, launched an internal investigation. It uncovered years of overlooked complaints and mismanagement. Within a week, the old leadership was out. A new board was sworn in, transparent, community-driven, and with clear rules that actually protected homeowners instead of intimidating them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the porch in gold, Sarah leaned her head on James's shoulder. "You still thinking about leaving?" she asked, her voice soft. James looked out at the street, at Ethan playing, at the neighbors smiling, at the flag gently swinging above the porch. "No," he said with a small smile. Not anymore. This street isn't for cowards, and it sure isn't for bullies. She smiled too, squeezing his hand. Then came the ring of his phone. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number, but answered anyway, expecting it to be a neighbor or a follow-up call from the department. Mr. Mitchell, the voice on the other end said, this is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We've reviewed your case and we'd like to formally offer you a position in our new national program for the protection of private residential communities. Your actions were exemplary. James chuckled, more amused than surprised. He stood up, watching Ethan run toward the mailbox, full of energy, full of life. Well, he replied calmly, that depends. On what? He smiled. You let me bring my Colt. 3 months had passed since that long, tense night, the night James Mitchell faced down armed imposters on his own front lawn and reminded everyone, both in his neighborhood and far beyond it, what real law enforcement looked like. The story had echoed across the country, shared on morning shows, radio stations, and articles with titles like The Cop Who Took Justice to His Front Porch, and One Man, One Badge, and a Revolver Named Colt. On Fox News, a primetime anchor called him the man who didn't let the law die on his own doorstep. James didn't seek attention, but attention found him. Despite the spotlight, he remained the same steady force in the community. He continued working with the county, not behind a desk, but in the field, helping draft better community safety plans, advising local departments, and speaking quietly at town halls where people now listened a little more closely. His phone buzzed more often. HOA boards from nearby counties asked him to review procedures. Homeowners sent emails thanking him for standing up when others might have stayed silent. He never made a show of it. That wasn't his way, but the changes were visible, and they were real. The neighborhood itself had changed too. The fear that once crept in like fog had cleared. Families felt safer. Kids played outside longer. Porch lights stayed on deep into the night, not out of fear but out of solidarity. New signs popped up on fences and front doors. Some read, "We believe in law, not theater." Others were simpler. "This home is protected by principle." James's warning sign still stood on his fence, bold as ever. Veteran lived here, armed and short-tempered. Now instead of drawing chuckles, it drew respect. HOA leadership had turned over completely. A full audit exposed years of mismanagement, neglect, and unresolved complaints. With James's help, the new board rewrote the bylaws, placing strict limits on enforcement actions, banning unannounced visits, and requiring every HOA representative to wear body cams during inspections. Transparency became policy, not just an idea. And then there was the Neighborhood Watch Group, born from fear, shaped by resolve. It started as a group chat, but grew into weekly meetings, patrol schedules, and a real sense of community ownership. No titles, no salaries, just accountability. James was its quiet center. People called him the anchor, the guy who never asked to lead but ended up doing it anyway. On one especially quiet evening, as clouds gathered above and thunder rolled in the distance, James stepped onto his porch like he had hundreds of times before. Sarah sat inside, reading near the fireplace. Ethan had gone to bed early after soccer practice. Everything was still, peaceful, earned. He placed his Colt python down on the wooden table beside a fresh cup of coffee, steam curling upward. The revolver wasn't for show but for history, a reminder of what had happened and what almost had. Rain began falling gently, tapping against the roof, the railings, the flag above the mailbox. James leaned against the post, watching the water shimmer across the driveway. The lawn he once defended now glistened under the porch light, and in that moment, everything felt exactly as it should. He took a slow sip from the mug, then spoke to no one in particular, his voice low, steady, almost like a warning whispered to the wind. "Next time," he muttered, "let the fake cops pick another house." He looked over at the revolver, the steel catching a soft golden reflection from the porch light. "Because this one," he said with quiet certainty, "this one's already cocked." And in that moment, alone, calm, unshaken, James Mitchell wasn't just the man who stopped the crime. He was the reason it would never happen again. But somewhere, in a neighborhood not so different from his own. Another HOA Karen was drafting her first complaint letter, blissfully unaware that the days of unchecked power were coming to an end.